So I want to set up our final project for the course, hopefully to make it interesting and fun. It's our chance to experiment with our techniques that we've developed throughout the course. I'm focusing it on a small building for two reasons. One is the idea of helping it to fit within the constraints of the time we have available in lab. And then another idea is really to promote this idea of the size of our projects is having a great impact on the environment, so to speak. The choices we make and the size goes directly towards material consumption and energy use. So I wanted to kind of highlight a couple of these things. And the first one I'm going to call in Praise for Small is really just a quick look at my own home that I constructed many years back. We had done, my wife and I had done some studies about current housing we had, and we were looking forward to actually living in smaller spaces. We had a large house in the city and another house in some recreational area. And I did some research prior to that, and it really surprised me what I learned. I learned that in the city of Buffalo, 32% of people live alone. 33% of people are only, households are only two-person. So a huge majority of the building type that we create really only needs to contain two people in it. And significantly, almost a third of our architecture only has to be inhabited by one person in order to supply the mix of housing types. So we found a site in the city that we wanted to build on and proposed a very modest home. And it was much in fitting with what the issues were with the lot that we were purchasing, because it was already a community garden. And one of the intentions here, if you let me make my highlighter show up here. If you look, we have a large amount of green space around a relatively small house. And we'd made some other suggestions in order to make the idea of putting a house in this garden area acceptable to the community. So here's some early renderings of it. And I don't want to spend too long on this project other than to kind of set this idea of how small scale can be interesting and rewarding, and something for you to think about in your architectural projects. So the house was very small. The idea of inviting people through the yard, because it was a corner lot. Yeah, the gardening was a significant part of setting the house properly within the context. This is the site as it was purchased, existing with no house on it. This was a little Photoshop of placing that house on the site. Interesting once again with the idea of smallness and simpleness. This is the full construction document for the building. So we have a site plan, some detailed sections, a full building section, a floor plan, an electrical plan, a roof framing plan, the 4 elevations of the building, and this is a roof schedule. And over here is what's called a plumbing waste vent diagram, a riser diagram. So this is mostly everything that's needed in a document set. And typically in a home construction, this might entail 20 or 30 pages of documents. But just kind of illustrating the simple nature of this house construction. And that simple nature is extended out. If you look to the bottom left corner, I discussed this idea of what's called a shallow frost protected foundation. We really need to dig very shallow foundations. And thus the next slide, that's the crew that would do the actual construction of the foundation. That's my wife and a very good friend of mine. And this is the start of our excavation for the foundation. Once again, I said we only had to go down a foot. So here we have, this is the top of the floor, and we will dig trenches along the outside edges in order to accommodate the foundation. And there's the crew on their lunch break. So here is the foundation now excavated with the insulation placed around the side of it. What we're looking at are a vapor barrier and some mesh that is used to control shrinkage and crackage within the concrete. This is the illustration, very simple, of the plumbing. We have the toilet drain, the shower drain, the vent. This will be attached to the sink drain, and all of this going out to the street. This is the idea of the shallow frost-protected foundation, and a little detail of that. Here's the crew on site for the day that the pour was done. So we hired a crew to help us with that one part of the project that would be very difficult to manage by ourselves. This kind of dates our project. This is scribbled into or carved into the concrete foundation. 2005 is when we poured it. So here's just an important idea of what size means. This is me framing the house. Very typical way of constructing. You start framing up off of the floor deck. Typically it's wood. In this case it's a concrete start to the building. Much easier to frame the walls while they're laying down. And then they would be erected in place. The crew on another lunch break. Here we have probably a few days into the project once the concrete was poured. Now the exterior walls, getting ready for placement of the roof rafters. Our site visit inspectors. This is my friend who has a lot more nerve than I do and helped place the top ridge beam. And this is now, probably about 2 weeks into construction, 2 or 3 weeks into construction. And I think this idea of how long it takes to build is also an important idea about the joy of building small, how fast things can move along. Our crews are small, tasks are manageable within day periods. So here we have start of that roof framing, some construction details of interest. You can see this board going across here. That is for the dormers that would be built up from here. That's why there's no framing filling in this area. And likewise over there. Probably a little later on now, we're probably about 3 weeks into construction. We have basically what you would call a weather-tight shell. We have the outside house wrap now covering over any openings. And this project started in late September, the end of September. So in Buffalo, winter was knocking on the door, so to speak. So moving along quickly was very beneficial and very manageable because we were building something small. Well, this is a Thanksgiving, I'm saying Thanksgiving, maybe a Thanksgiving site visit now. So we're about a month and a half into the project. The plumbing is in place. Most of the electrical has been done. And we're getting ready to place insulation. It's always amazing how much insulation goes into a building. Another concept about building small is how energy efficient it can be. So we can heat our house without actually having a furnace. We use our hot water tank to heat the house by passing the hot water under the floor. This is the job of placing the drywall. I've got an auxiliary heater now. You can see that the snow has fallen. Probably late into November at this point. Here we are placing radiant floor tubing in on top of insulation. Like I said, this would circulate back through the hot water tank to heat the house. There's tubing coming up through the floor, and that's the hot water tank that will get installed probably pretty soon in this part of the project. So while I was working on this project, it was really quite popular, and I thought about actually making modules of this to sell or to help make affordable housing. So this was just an animation, just kind of shows you the amount of complexity, or should I say simplicity, that goes into this kind of house construction. This is it nearing completion. Now we have just exterior work to do. This is probably mostly complete on the interior. This would be then early in spring of the following year. We were already living in the house at this point, just needing to do some exterior finish work of painting and that. And the next scene is obviously a jump ahead, probably a couple of years, but this just shows the contrast of the addition of the final painting on the house. And some pictures of it during warmer weather. So even though it was a small house, it garnered a lot of attention. It was in HGTV tiny house presentations. It was also in a couple of magazines. So it was pretty well accepted by the community. and surprisingly cheap to construct. We probably spent $55,000 between the acquisition of the land, which was about $25,000, and the materials, which was about equal or a little bit more for its construction. So here's some shots from that magazine in 2017 about what the interior looks like. So just one thing to get you, I guess, thinking about your creation of this small space. The small spaces don't have to be uninteresting and or I guess not the subject of architectural merit or intensity of design. And we'll pick up with this in a little more detail in the next series when we start talking specifically about this idea of accessory dwelling units.